The chandelier light spilled across white linen as Adrian Cole sat alone, a dark cane resting against his chair. A waiter slid the wrong plate in front of him, then bumped his shoulder, smirking. Quiet laughter rippled around the nearby tables. No one in the room respected the blind guest. Then Lena Carter stepped forward, her voice cut clean through the silence. "You are crossing the line." She locked her eyes on Adrian, expecting nothing back, but his head turned slow and precise, meeting her stare with impossible accuracy. How could a blind man know exactly where she was looking? 2 days before that night at the restaurant, Adrian Cole stood alone in the glass office on the 42nd floor of Cole Hospitality Group, looking at numbers he no longer trusted. Revenue at the flagship branch on Madison Avenue had slipped for 6 straight quarters, and every report his managers placed on his desk explained the loss in clean, polished sentences. Too clean. The kind of language a man learns to write when he is hiding something. He had built the restaurant from a single dining room into a name spoken in the same breath as the oldest establishments in the city. He had done it without partners, without a wife to share the weight, without anyone he could call at midnight when the books refused to balance. That solitude had once felt like discipline. Now it felt like blindness, the real kind, the kind that lets people steal in front of you while smiling. So he chose another kind of blindness, one he could control. His private auditor, a woman named Diane Whitmore, had warned him for months that something inside the Madison Avenue branch was rotten. She had even named a suspect, Marcus Hale, the senior floor manager, but every paper trail led nowhere. Adrian needed to see it himself in the room without the protection of his title. A man in a tailored suit walking through the front door would change every behavior in the building. A blind stranger with a cane would change nothing. He spent a full day with a consultant who trained actors for sight-impaired roles. He learned how to hold the cane, how to angle his face, how to let his eyes drift just slightly off the speaker. He bought tinted glasses, a worn coat, and a quieter watch. By the time he stepped out of his car on the night of the test, no one would have recognized the man whose name was carved on the front of the building. He arrived at 7:40 in the evening on a Friday, when the dining room was at its loudest. Vincent Reed, the head waiter, met him at the door with the practiced smile reserved for guests who looked like they did not matter. Adrian had chosen the reservation under a false name paid in advance and asked for the corner table. Vincent led him there with his hand barely guiding the elbow already bored. Adrian sat down, set the cane against the chair, and listened. He listened to the way silverware hit porcelain, to the rhythm of the kitchen door swinging to the laughter from table 9, where a group of regulars were celebrating something he could not name. He listened to Vincent's voice change the moment he turned away softer, almost amused, as he told another waiter that the man at the corner table won't notice if we pour him the cheaper wine. Adrian did not move. He let his face stay calm, almost empty, the way a blind man's face is supposed to stay. Inside, his pulse moved 1 degree faster. Diane had been right. The rot was not a rumor. It was already on the floor, already in the wine, already in the smile of the man who had walked him to his seat. The first plate arrived 10 minutes later. Adrian had ordered the seared duck. What landed in front of him was the salmon, a dish nearly half the price. Vincent set it down with a soft, almost gentle clink and announced the duck by name. Slowly, the way one might speak to a man who had lost more than his sight. Adrian let his hand find the edge of the plate and lifted his fork. He could smell the salmon before it reached his mouth. He chewed once, swallowed, and said nothing. Across the room near the service station, 2 waiters were watching, leaning against the wall, as if a private show had begun. A few minutes later, a younger server walked past and let the back of his hip catch Adrian's shoulder. The wine in Adrian's glass jumped and spilled across the white cloth. The young man apologized, in a voice that was not an apology, then drifted away without offering to clean it. Adrian heard a quiet laugh behind him, muffled into a napkin. He lowered his hand and pressed his fingertips into the wet linen counting silently. He had built this place for moments, like the one happening to other people in this room, the older couple at table 6, who had come for an anniversary, the businessman at table 11, who had brought a client he wanted to impress. They were paying premium prices for an experience that behind the linen and the candlelight was being run by people who had stopped caring. The bill came before he had asked for it. Adrian could not see the paper, but he heard Vincent fold it open and recite the total in a smooth, confident voice, a number nearly $40 higher than what the menu would have justified, even with the wrong dish. A small line at the bottom, Vincent said, was a service correction. Adrian asked mildly what that correction was for. Vincent answered that it was standard. Then he added with the same patient tone, "Most of our regular guests don't ask." In the kitchen pass-through window, Adrian could hear Marcus Hale's voice, now low and certain, giving instructions about a delivery slip. The words were vague, but the shape of them was familiar, the shape of a man moving inventory off the books. Diane had described that exact rhythm in her last memo. Hearing it in person in the middle of his own dining room was worse than reading it. Adrian set his hand on the table palm flat. He let the silence around his table grow for one long breath. The waiters at the station had gone back to laughing about something else already done with him. To them, he was a story they would tell at the end of the shift, the blind man who had taken the wrong fish and the wrong bill and walked out smiling. He had come here to confirm a suspicion. He had it now, and more. The Madison Avenue branch was not failing because of the market or the menu. It was failing because the people he had trusted had decided somewhere along the way that a customer who could not see them clearly was a customer who could be used. It was at that moment, as the laughter rose again from the service station, that a different set of footsteps approached his table. Lighter, steadier, unhurried. A new voice, a woman's, asked if she could clear the salmon and bring him something warm. Her tone did not soften the way Vincent's had. She spoke to him exactly the way she would have spoken to any other guest in the room. Adrian let her take the plate. Her name tag read, Lena Carter, though he would only learn that later from another server who muttered it with a small edge of resentment. Lena did not narrate her actions. She did not slow her words. She placed a fresh napkin into his hand, without making a gesture of it, and when she set down a glass of water, she tapped the rim once gently, so he would know exactly where it was. She turned to leave, and that was when she saw the wine still soaking into the linen and the wet shoulder of his coat, and the two waiters leaning against the wall, with the smiles of men who had not been caught yet. Her steps stopped where she stood, and Adrian heard the shift in her weight before he heard her voice. "You are crossing the line," Lena said, low, directed at the station. "Whatever you think is funny here, it ends now." The laughter cut off. Vincent stepped forward, ready with the easy authority of a man used to running the floor, and told her to mind her own section. Lena did not move. She told him in the same flat voice that the guest at this table would receive the meal he had ordered at the price on the menu, and an apology that was actually an apology. Then she turned her face toward Adrian, and that was when something inside the room changed, because Adrian, without thinking, turned his head and met her gaze, not in her direction, not near it, exactly into her eyes. The angle was wrong for a man who had been listening to her footsteps. The accuracy was wrong for a man who had spent the last hour staring at nothing. For half a second there was no sound between them, and Adrian felt the mistake travel down his spine like cold water. Lena did not flinch. She did not point it out. She simply held the look one beat longer than she should have, then dipped her head, said she would bring the correct dish, and walked away. Adrian sat very still. Around him the dining room continued its noise, porcelain laughter, the low hum of a Friday night. But he was already calculating something new, something he had not planned for. Lena Carter was either the only person in this building with a conscience, or she was the only person sharp enough to have just caught him. He did not yet know which answer would be more dangerous. Adrian came back the next night, and the night after that. He kept the same coat, the same cane, the same false name on the reservation. Vincent Reed greeted him each time with the practiced patience of a man who believed he was being generous. Adrian let him believe it. He needed to see how far the rot had spread when no one thought a witness was watching. By the third evening he had mapped the pattern. A case of imported wine arrived at 4 in the afternoon and was logged into the inventory system at full count. By 6, 2 bottles were gone from the rack and not from any guest's table. A delivery of prime cuts came through the back door, and the slip Marcus Hale signed listed 12 units, when Adrian, sitting near the kitchen pass, had counted only 9 being carried in. The numbers were small enough to look like clerical drift. Done every night across every shipment, they were a second salary. The dining room had its own version of the same theft. Vincent had a habit of folding the bill in a particular way. Before he announced the total, a small crease across the upper corner, and Adrian came to recognize the sound. Every time the corner creased, the number that followed was higher than the menu allowed. Out-of-town guests paid it without question. Regulars who knew the prices were given a clean receipt. The trick was small, surgical, and old. Adrian heard a couple at table 4 argue politely about a charge they did not recognize, and he heard Vincent talk them down with a story about a seasonal supplement. He heard a businessman accept a bill that was $80 heavier than it should have been because he was trying to impress a client and could not afford the embarrassment of checking. Each of those moments Adrian filed away in a small voice memo on the phone tucked inside his coat. The floor staff had grown bolder around him. A waiter named Tom Adrian had heard Vincent use the name twice, now made a small game of seating tables near the blind guest, in low voices, narrating his every gesture for amusement. The wine in Adrian's glass was always cheap. The bread was always yesterday's. The cane that he set against his chair had been kicked aside more than once, and never returned to where he could reach it without effort. Through all of it, Marcus Hale moved across the floor with the calm of a man who believed the building belonged to him. He greeted regulars by name. He approved comp meals for friends with a flick of his pen. He stepped into the office behind the kitchen at the end of each night and stayed there long after the staff had gone home. Adrian could hear through the thin wall behind his usual table the soft, steady tap of a keyboard and the occasional crack of a printer coming to life. Marcus was building something in there, not just stealing. Building. Adrian listened. He counted. He let the cheap wine sit in his glass and the wrong dishes cool in front of him. Every insult was a line in a ledger he was keeping in his own head, and the ledger was almost full. Lena Carter noticed before anyone else. It started with the cane. On the second night, she had set it carefully against Adrian's chair, in a position where his hand could find it without reaching. When she walked past an hour later, the cane had been knocked to the floor by a passing waiter, and Adrian had bent down in one quiet movement and picked it up. He had picked it up from exactly the spot where it had fallen, without sweeping his hand, without searching. He had picked it up as if he had seen it land. She did not say anything. She brought him fresh bread and refilled his water and watched. The next night, she watched harder. When Vincent set down a wrong plate, Adrian's fork went straight to the food. No hesitation, no exploring. When a server walked behind him, his head tilted in the direction of the footsteps before they had passed his shoulder. Small things. A blind man might have managed any one of them by chance. A blind man did not manage all of them in a single evening. Lena had grown up in a small town outside Albany, where her grandfather had lost his sight in his late 60s and lived another 15 years after that. She knew the rhythm of a person who could not see the half-second delay before reaching the way the head moved a fraction past the source of sound to triangulate it. Adrian did none of that. He did the imitation of it, and the imitation was good. It just wasn't real. She thought about telling Vincent. She thought about telling Marcus. She thought about it for less than a minute, and then she stopped, because the second she imagined either of their faces hearing the news, She understood what would happen. Whatever this man was doing in the corner of their dining room, he was doing it for a reason. And the people who would react first to the truth were the people she trusted least. So she chose silence. She kept bringing him the right bread and the right water. She made sure the cane stayed within his reach. She corrected the dishes that came to his table in the wrong order, and she did it without making a show of it, so that Vincent would not notice the section being repaired behind his back. She watched Adrian's face, and his face never gave her anything in return. He was good at that, too. On the fourth night, she walked past his table just as Marcus stepped out of the back office, and she caught the smallest thing, Adrian's hand, resting on the white cloth, going still. Not relaxed. Still. The way a hand goes still when its owner is listening for a specific voice. And Marcus's voice was the one in the room. Lena understood then that, whatever this was, it was bigger than a strange guest. The man at the corner table was here for Marcus. She did not yet know who he was, or what authority he carried, or what he intended to do. But she decided somewhere between the kitchen door and the dessert station that when the moment came, she would not be standing on Marcus's side of it. Marcus Hale had been running the Madison Avenue branch for almost 4 years, and somewhere in the 3rd year, he had stopped thinking of it as Adrian Cole's restaurant. The owner had not walked the floor in 14 months. Every report Marcus sent upstairs came back signed without comment. Every replacement hire he proposed was approved. The building had become, by quiet inheritance, his. He had begun the work carefully. A small adjustment in the inventory system here, a friendly arrangement with a meat supplier there. By the end of the 2nd year, he had 2 parallel sets of numbers, the ones the company saw and the ones that were true. By the end of the 3rd, he was moving close to $120,000 a year out of the building through a network of small leaks that no single audit would catch. Vincent took a cut for keeping the floor staff loyal. 2 of the line cooks took a smaller cut for not asking questions. Everyone else simply enjoyed the looseness of a kitchen where no one was checking. But Marcus was not a thief. That was how he thought of himself. He was a builder. The next step had been forming in his mind for months, a clean break in which he would carry his arrangement out of Cole Hospitality and into a new restaurant of his own, financed by suppliers who already trusted him and staffed by the people on his floor who had grown used to working his way. The plan needed only one more thing before it could move. He needed the existing books to disappear. That was where Diane Whitmore had become a problem. Marcus had heard through a contact in the corporate office that the auditor had been quietly requesting older shipment records. He had heard his own name mentioned in a memo he was not supposed to see. He understood that the window for a quiet exit was beginning to close, and that meant the cleanup had to happen now in one decisive night before Diane could put her files in front of Adrian Cole. He set the date for Friday. Vincent was told only what he needed to know, that the inventory system would be reset over the weekend, and that any waiter who had ever taken a friendly tip off the books should make sure his locker was clean by Saturday morning. 2 of Marcus's chosen line cooks were told to be ready to walk out with him when the new place opened. Everyone else would be left to explain whatever the audit eventually found. What Marcus did not know was that the man at the corner table, the blind guest who had sat through 3 nights of mockery without complaint, had already heard most of his plan through the thin wall behind the kitchen. What he did not know was that the cane against the chair was holding a recorder, and that the quiet auditor he was trying to outrun had been receiving Adrian's voice memos every morning before sunrise. Marcus thought he was finishing a heist. He was walking into one. Friday came. Adrian arrived at his usual hour and took his usual seat. Vincent's smile was thinner than usual, and the dining room ran with a strange, tight rhythm. Fewer comp meals, fewer creased bills, every server moving with the hush of a staff that had been told to behave for one night and one night only. Adrian understood at once that something had changed. The cleanup was beginning around him. At 9:14, his phone buzzed once inside his coat pocket. A single short pulse, the signal he had set with Diane to mean, "We have a problem." He excused himself toward the restroom, slow cane in hand, and read the message in the privacy of the corridor. Diane had lost access to the inventory database 40 minutes earlier. Someone had pushed an administrative reset from inside the building. 3 years of shipment records were being overwritten in real time. By morning, every receipt that did not match Marcus's clean version would be gone. Adrian tried his own credentials from his phone. The system rejected them. He tried again. Rejected. Marcus had revoked the owner's access from inside the owner's own restaurant, and the audit log that would have shown who did it was the first thing being erased. Adrian stood very still in the corridor, the cane light in his hand, and felt for the first time in a long time the thin, cold edge of being outmaneuvered. He returned to his table. He sat down. He kept his face blank. Around him, the dining room continued its quiet, well-behaved Friday, and somewhere in the back office, a man he had trusted with the building was systematically deleting the only proof of what he had done. Diane's voice in a follow-up message was steady and terrible. Without the original shipment data, the voice memos in Adrian's phone were anecdotes. Powerful, but not actionable. Not in court. Not in a boardroom. Not against a manager who had spent 4 years making himself look indispensable. Adrian thought through every move he had left, and each one closed in on itself. If he stood up now and revealed who he was, Marcus would simply finish the deletion under cover of the chaos and walk out clean. If he waited until morning, there would be nothing left to recover. If he called the police, he would be a man in tinted glasses making accusations against his own senior manager with no surviving paper trail. He had built an empire on his own without partners, without anyone he could call at midnight, and tonight, inside that empire, he was a stranger sitting at a table no one respected. He set his hand on the white cloth and let it rest there. The candle in the center of the table flickered once. From the corner of his vision, half a room away, he saw Lena Carter watching him. She did not look away. She did not pretend. She had seen the moment his hand went still, and she understood without being told that the man at the corner table had just lost. Adrian sat at the corner table with his hands folded and the room dimming at the edges of his attention. He had built Cole Hospitality on a single principle that he could carry the weight alone, that no betrayal could reach him if no one was close enough to swing. Tonight, that principle was the exact reason he was about to lose everything. The thin wall behind him was still humming with the soft, steady tap of a keyboard, and every keystroke was another receipt being erased. He could stand up now and announce himself. Vincent would freeze. 2 or 3 waiters would scatter. The dining room would become a small public scandal, exactly the kind Marcus needed to finish his work in the back office without interruption. By the time anyone thought to check the server room, the deletion would be complete, and the man at the keyboard would walk out the back door as a manager who had served his employer faithfully and been insulted in the dining room for his trouble. Adrian needed eyes inside that office. He needed someone who could move across the floor without being questioned. Someone Marcus had not flagged, someone who could reach the back corridor before the last file was overwritten. Diane was 40 blocks uptown with a laptop that no longer connected to anything. The corporate security team would take 20 minutes to mobilize, and 20 minutes was the entire window he had left. He lifted his head slow, careful, and let his face turn toward the dessert station. Lena was standing there with a tray balanced against her hip, watching him the way she had been watching him for 2 nights now. He did not signal. He simply held the look. And after a long second, she set the tray down and walked toward his table. She bent close, as if she were clearing his glass. Her voice was barely above the hum of the room. "Whatever this is, it's happening tonight. I can see it on your face." Adrian kept his hands flat on the cloth. He spoke without moving his head. "The office behind the kitchen. The man inside is erasing 4 years of records right now. I cannot get into that room without being seen. You can." Lena did not ask who he was. She did not ask why he was there. She had known for days that the answer would come in a moment exactly like this one, and the moment had come. She lifted his glass, set down a fresh napkin, and said only, "Tell me what to do." Adrian's hand moved beneath the table and pressed a small, flat object into her palm, a thin black drive no larger than a lipstick. "Plug it into the back of his terminal, the lower port. It will copy everything in the cache and lock the system. He will not be able to overwrite what is already gone, but he will not be able to delete what is left." Lena closed her hand around the drive. Her face did not change. She walked away from his table the way she had walked away on the first night, unhurried, calm, with the steady rhythm of a woman who had not just agreed to risk her job and possibly more. Adrian watched her go without watching her. The cane was light against his fingers. The room was very loud. Lena moved through the kitchen the way she always did at this hour, checking the dessert pass, refilling water pitchers, exchanging a quiet word with the line cook nearest the door. Marcus had trained the staff to register her as background, and tonight that training served her. She slipped past the prep station, past the walk-in, and into the narrow corridor that led to the back office. The door was almost closed. Through the inch of open space, she could see Marcus at the desk, sleeves rolled up, the glow of 2 monitors on his face. He was not panicked. He was working with the patience of a man who believed he had already won. A printer hummed beside him, spitting out what looked like a clean version of the last quarter's inventory, the version he intended to leave behind for Diane Whitmore to find on Monday morning. Lena pushed the door with her shoulder, the way a tired waitress would, and stepped inside with a tray she had picked up on the way. "Vincent said to bring you coffee," she said, in the dull voice of a woman who had been doing favors for managers all night. Marcus did not look up. He waved her toward the side table without breaking his rhythm at the keyboard. She set the tray down. The side table was less than a foot from the back of his terminal. She bent to straighten the saucer, and her free hand moved behind the tower with the smooth, practiced economy of someone who had spent years carrying full trays through tight spaces. The drive slid into the lower port, a faint click. She turned, picked up the empty pitcher she had brought as a prop, and walked out without looking at his screens. She had not yet reached the kitchen door when the first monitor froze. She heard Marcus swear, once quiet, then louder. She heard him hit the keyboard. She heard him try to reboot the system, and then she heard the second sound, the one Adrian had told her to listen for, a long, low tone from the printer as it canceled its job mid-sheet. The cache had been copied. The system was locked. Whatever Marcus had been about to delete was now sitting on a drive in a stranger's pocket, and whatever he had already deleted no longer mattered because the original shipment ledgers, the real ones, the ones he had thought were buried under 3 years of clean overwrites, had been pulled out of the cache before the final pass could finish. Lena walked back to the floor. She did not go to Adrian's table. She went to the dessert station, picked up a fresh tray, and continued her shift. 2 minutes later, Marcus came out of the back corridor with his face composed, his sleeves rolled down, and the small, tight smile of a man who had decided to leave the building before the night ended. He did not get the chance. The front door of the restaurant opened, and 4 people in dark coats stepped inside corporate security. Led by a woman Lena had never seen before, holding a tablet and a calm, unsmiling face. Diane Whitmore had arrived. The dining room did not understand what was happening at first. The 4 coats moved with quiet efficiency, and Diane walked straight to the corner table, where the blind guest with the cane was already rising to his feet. Adrian removed the tinted glasses and folded them into his pocket. He did not look at the room. He looked only at Marcus, who had stopped halfway across the floor, with the expression of a man whose last calculation had just failed. "Marcus, moi," Adrian said in a voice that carried without effort. "The system you tried to erase tonight has been preserved. Every shipment, every adjustment, every receipt you creased before announcing the total. We have all of it. We have your last 4 years." Vincent Reed near the service station took 1 step backward and then stopped because there was nowhere to step backward to. The waiters who had laughed about the cheap wine and the wrong fish stood very still at the wall. The regulars at table 9 who had been celebrating something earlier in the evening lowered their voices to nothing. The man they had watched being mocked for 3 nights was the man whose name was carved on the front of the building. Diane handed Marcus a folder without ceremony. Inside it were the original shipment slips, the side-by-side comparison with his clean version, and a list of suppliers who had already agreed to cooperate in exchange for being left out of the criminal filing. Marcus looked at the first page for a long time. He did not argue. He did not bargain. He set the folder down on the nearest table, took off the small pin that marked him as senior floor manager, and placed it on top of the folder. Then the 4 coats walked him out through the front door, in full view of the dining room he had spent 4 years quietly turning into his own. Vincent went next, then the 2 waiters from the service station, then the line cooks Marcus had chosen as his future staff. Each of them was escorted out without a scene. The remaining employees, the ones who had not been invited into the arrangement, the ones who had only worked their shifts and gone home, stood along the walls and watched. Adrian addressed them briefly. He told them the restaurant would close for the rest of the weekend. He told them their jobs were safe. He told them the rebuilding would begin on Monday, and that the people who rebuilt it with him would be the people who had earned the right to. He turned finally to Lena. She was standing near the dessert station, the empty tray still in her hand, her face composed in the way it had been composed all evening. Adrian crossed the room and stopped in front of her. "You knew," he said. "You knew on the second night." Lena did not deny it. "I knew you were not blind. I did not know who you were. I made a choice about which side of this room I trusted. The side I trusted was yours." Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and this time his eyes met hers, without performance, without calculation, without the careful drift of a man pretending not to see. "On Monday," he said, "I am restructuring the floor. I would like you to lead it." Lena did not answer immediately. She looked at the tray in her hand, then at the room behind him, then back at his face. "I will need a real contract, and I will need you to walk this floor more than once every 14 months. A small, tired smile moved across Adrian's mouth, the first genuine one in a long time. "Agreed." Outside on Madison Avenue, the city kept its Friday rhythm. Inside, the candles on the empty tables continued to burn down toward their holders. The truth had taken 3 nights of mockery, 1 act of quiet courage, and 1 woman who had refused to look away. It had been enough. It had been, in the end, exactly enough.